Hello student, today we are going to discuss in this lecture violence against women, and it would be a global dimension, or you may call it global perspective. Let me introduce to this what we are going to learn through this lecture. A is that we need to understand what is violence against women, how it has been defined. Now, violence against women is a term refers to the violent act, and that is primarily or exclusively committed against women also, and now as you see that the other genders also is a part of that, right? When one is talking about the global context, one need to understand that the role of the United Nations. Now, the United Nations General Assembly defines violence against women as any act of gender-based violence that results in or are likely to result in a physical, sexual, mental, or any kind of harm or the suffering to the woman, including threats of such acts, or coercion or arbitrary or deprivation of liberty, whether it is occurring in public or private life or private domain, we can call it. The 1993 Declaration on the Elimination of the Violence Against Women noted that this violence, including battering, sexual abuse of the children, dowry-related violence, rapes, then FGP, which we call it female genital mutilation, and other traditional practices harmful to women, for instance, non-spousal violence, and the violence related to any kind of exploitation of the bodies of the woman or any kind of violence which is related. So the sexual harassment also includes in that intimidation at workplace, in the educational institute, and elsewhere. It also includes trafficking in women, forced prostitution. Violence could be perpetuated by either of it might be the family members or it might be state itself. So this is how the United Nations or the United Nations General Assembly stated as. To understand further, one has to also understand how these debates goes on. Now, according to Hervey and Peter, these are very important. Peter Gove and Penelope Hervey, they contributed in 1994 their research, and what they argued. They argued that violence against women is tied to the history of women being viewed as a property, and gender roles assigned to the submissive men and women, and the other these categories, these binaries are formulated. So it's like the bodies of the woman or the woman have been taken for granted as a result of the subordination. At least 1 out of 3 women has been beaten up. And we all of us knows that in the pandemic, when lockdown across the world was going on, we have seen that the number of the violence against women in the entire globe, in the entire world, including India, South Asia, it is gone up. It's increasing day by day. So if we go and look at the figure, these figures also has been increasing, and there are multiple ways in which we can actually articulate and raise our voices. So there are 3 women have been beaten up, at least, forced into the sex or abuse during the lifetime, and according to the study based on the 50% of the surveys from around the world, which shows that these figures were what I said. So on most of the occasion, the abuser was a member of the woman's family. So within family, the violence is much more. The intensity of the violence, where woman actually, this whole notion is there that family is a safe place for woman, which is not true. So if you go and look at that, the ways in which that the violence against women happening on the bodies of women, and the other, it also includes the mental violence and all sorts of violence. So, it's a within family it's had been happening. So one woman in four has been abused during pregnancy, right? I mean, you see that what critical condition women go through. So more than 60 million women worldwide are considered missing as a result of a sex-selective abortion and female feticide, which again is an old infanticide, feticide. These debates are there. Feminists in fact denied this category using female infanticide and feticide. And they said the sex selective abortion, because in the patriarchal society, you would see that number of times that the male preference is there. So, and this missing woman is something that which Amartya Sen, Nobel laureate, who talked about that, which is very, very important intervention he did. And way back when he wrote, he said that 60 million women in the worldwide are missing. So where they go, no one knows. That's a real mystery. So World Health Organization has reported that 70% of the female murders happen, and they are the ones who are victimized and have been killed by their own male partners. So you can understand that how violence has been faced by the women. So therefore, one has to understand that the interpersonal violence is another leading cause of the death among the women between the age of 15 to 44. And these are the little bit old figure which I said, but then these are very important to look into. So population based studies, in fact, it shows that between 12 to 25% of the women have experienced attempted or completed forced sex by an intimate partner or ex-partners at some point of time. And these are something which are very important debates which we need to discuss across the world. So since we are talking about the global context of the violence, I just want to flag here on the UNIFEM report. Now what UNIFEM report says? A life free of violence is our right. And which reveals that 3 million women are battered each other worldwide. 1 in 6 women are the victims of the rape in industrialized country, and between 16 to 52% of the women surveyed were assaulted by intimate partner. The same report also reveals that in India, dowry-related violence claims the lives of over 5,000 women each year. I mean, we have the Dowry Prevention Act, but even though having that, 5,000 women, and its numbers are increasing day by day, each year are dying with the dowry deaths. The report of the Special Rapporteur on the Violence Against Women on the issue of domestic violence in Brazil make note of the establishment of the Parliament Commission to investigate violence against women in Brazil in the year 1993. So this commission found that around 88.8% of the female victims of the physical violence were housewives. So you can see that the number of women and the ways in which they are actually facing the problems, the amount of violence which is intimated to them. In Kenya, 42% of the women in Kisii district reported that they were regularly beaten in their homes. In the United States, 1 woman is physically abused by her intimate partner every 9 seconds. So you can understand what we say, in fact, that those who are nation state are more developed, where women might be safe, is a wrong notion. So in the United Kingdom, 1 woman in 10 is severely beaten by the intimidate partner. And the studies in Canada show that women are more likely to be murdered by an intimidate partner than by a stranger. And in India, according to the National Crime Record Bureau, you can always go and check the website if you wish to and see that how the National Crime Record Bureau is giving us the figures which are increasing day by day. And I'm just figuring out here some of the important data. One crime committed against women every 3 minutes, one molestation case every 15 minutes, one sexual harassment case every 53 minutes, one kidnapping and abducting case every 23 minutes, one rape case every 29 minutes. These are the little bit, old figures which are taken from 2005 record. But you want to update, you can always go and check it, some of them. Now let us understand that these figures also, since we talked about the developed nation state, underdeveloped nation state, let us also understand that the violence against women in South Asia. The South Asian women face horrendous violence. And those categories of violence against women are various categories, right? In South Asia and across the world, these categories are existing. So we have to understand this, right? So over physical abuse, which includes battering, sexual assault at home and in the workplace, is one of the very important factor. Then the next is the psychological abuse. Exploitation of the woman's labor also is there, and which include that non-payment or the underpayment for the labor or the denial of the benefits in the formal sector. Like for instance, in the organized sector, in the government employed sector, right to take a leave is a right of the woman, as the right to take a leave is also the right of the men also. Now a woman, for instance, in any government servant, like the maternity leave is denied to the woman who is pregnant. That can be also sort of physical, psychological violence, right? It's a sort of mental harassment which one can understand. But in the informal sector, we do not have those guidelines. I mean, having also it never been implemented. So sexual division of labor, as I mentioned to you, that the exploitation of the women labor, where they are not getting paid properly, there is a sexual harassment also. There's also delay in payment, or sometimes they are not even getting any kind of payment. So sexual division of labor in the home living and multiple burdens which women carry in their life, which is a very significant to understand here, that there is an outright denial. Then deprivation of the access and control of the resources for physical, social, economic development. For instance, like a pregnant woman is there and she has to eat healthy, nutritious food. A girl child have a right to have an education, but she is born as a girl and therefore there is a denial not to go to the school in the patriarchal society. And then the means and modes of protection, which debates also includes here, to keep women dependent. And then constantly that so the violence against women goes increasing. And sometimes it happens also that women, they might be financially independent, but they cannot articulate, they cannot come out from the violence. So the violence is not something that which particularly is having certain kind of things, for instance the class. But yes, we do understand that there's of course the hierarchy of caste and class, and the violence happens in a structural society very categorically on the woman who comes from the marginal communities and the caste or the communal violence also, you would see that the bodies of women have been there to manipulate. So oppression through cultural and religious practices, like for instance sati, honor killing, these are the important examples to understand. And the commodification of the woman, like trafficking, prostitution, or the pornography. So therefore it's very important to understand violence against women is not limited to the traditional forms of beating up or raping or the murders. Now the modes of victimization are constantly emerging. The forms of violence also are changing. Violence starts before birth, and it continues over the life cycle. And you would see that the ways in which the child, for instance, the girl child born in some parts of the world and South Asia, but also includes India, that as the baby girl borns, they are, some people just kill them, and particularly the state which we call it quite progressive in India. So, for instance, Tamil Nadu, in some districts, the girl child born, or even in Maharashtra, and they put the name called Nakoshi, means Nakoshi means in Marathi is that the one who the parents don't want that child, therefore it's called Nakoshi. Several forms of the violence which constitutes a violation on the woman's right to live right to live a life with respect and dignity is a question mark. And these includes the rape, incest, domestic violence, burning of the widows, female, again I said sex selective abortion, trafficking, sexual harassment, molestation, eve-teasing, dowry deaths, honor killing. And as I mentioned to you, these are the number of things which one has to understand. And this list is an endless list, because now today you see that the cyber social media is there. So in the social media you would see that gender trolling which is happening, that's also a form of violence, particularly to women, and sometimes the bullying also, that's also. So you would see that the forms of the violence are changing as the time changes, and the examples are the several examples. It's changing drastically. The pattern forms also, natures also are changing very fast. So over violence is more than what we think. It's beyond, and it's covert in a nature, and it in fact generates the discrimination, subjugation, and it sort of provides the negligence of the woman's existence. So as a matter of fact that this covert violence again is a very prevalent, and it is impossible to identify or quantify, or remains invisible. Now the United Nations again declaration on the elimination of the violence against women regards that the unequal power relation which is there, and the main cause and the core of the violence against women is that unequal power relations. So it is that which in fact deals and which led to the domination over the discrimination against women by men, and to prevent the full advances of the woman, and that violence against women is one of the crucial social mechanism by which women are forced into subordination position compared with men. Among the crime rapes, molestation, sexual harassment, murder, dowry, these are very frequent cases which one would see. And the intensity of this can be, read in the areas which are more affected. For instance, you take an example of the attacks. For instance, the geographical location in which that the more terrorist attacks are happening. What makes violence against women is more dangerous is then that sometimes a state itself is a very repressive state, and in the several occasions one would see that, the violence which is done by the state, which many times that people are not able to narrate that, but also at the which we call it the public violence, but at the same time, the private sphere also, family, which tend to create the violence. And one would understand this difference between the public and private violence against women in order to understand the family versus the state. And you would see that how these kind of things are happening. But at the same time, it's very important that the violence which might be happening in public and private domain, but it has a significance, and it's a state who has to do the intervention. Let's also try to understand the nature and the forms of violence, how it is changing or happening. The nature and the form of violence is intertwined. It's one is connected with the other, so it's intertwined with the physical, mental, psychological levels. And the violence against women includes, but not limited, it's a psychological violence which encompasses various tactics to undermine a woman's self-confidence, such as, and you would see that in many places, in public places also this is happening. That, and as I mentioned to you, the social media is the best example to provide the psychological violence. Like for instance, that it's a common thing that students go to the colleges and they have certain ideology, and then one student is from the one ideology and the other is from other ideology, so that the ways in which that the insult of the woman which happen, or the mockery or the threat or the abuse, or sometimes the kind of language which has been used, foul language or humiliation or the harassment or the contempt, these are a deliberate attempt actually to deprive the woman, and then it leads to the isolation and the emotional trauma. And sometimes some girls in teenage, they would not able to do it, or the children from the teenage, they would not able to tolerate. So, and as a result, we see that the number of cases of the suicide also of the children are increasing through this social media. So we need to also understand the physical violence, which is again been coercion of the power, right? So the most obvious ranges is from the pushing or solving or hitting, beating, physical abuse with women, or the torture and murder. These again are the common examples. The one more is that the sexual violence. So any kind of non-consensual activity which is there, the forced rape or the relationship which leads to again sexual violence, harassment, unwanted touching or the rape. These are the sexual assault or sexual violence which we call it. The two categories of the violence which I want to include also here is the caste violence, and India is a structured society. It is based on the hierarchies of the caste, and you would see that number of caste violence. And I would just cite here 2006 Kherlanji case from the Maharashtra, from the village of Kherlanji, in which that the two mother and daughter and two sons, they were lynched and killed. This was an example of the caste violence. At the same time, you would see the communal violence which is happening. One religion versus other religions. There will be provocative talks by some people, local people or some leaders, which leads to some kind of violence. That also is a communal violence in which people lose their life, and the hatred, the ways in which it operates in the mind, and then it leads to the destruction of the property of the government and many other things which are included. So one has to see that. And the important thing is that the control over the resources, like for instance in the home, that whatever is earned, the entire control, even the females are earning, but the entire control of the financial matter is taken over by the men in the family, and all the resources are controlled by the men. So there is a sort of financial violence which also includes in that. So one has to understand these debates very, very carefully. Now, spiritual abuse, like for instance that works to destroy the individual cultures or religious belief through reduce and the punishment, and this leads to the many times superstitions or intimidations. And the forms of violence can include making women afraid of to say something and to make them gestures, and then destroy their property, make them isolated. These are again sort of violence, or sometimes it happens, and it's a best example is that the sometime that using privilege, somebody is sitting in the position of power, and that power has been is a form in which that the a particular person is using on the children or the employee. So you can understand that, and at the same time abuser is the master slave relationship, the ways in which develop. And therefore it's very important to understand the traditional role of all genders, right? To understand further the violence against women and all other genders, let us see what causes violence. Now, the United Nations identified 6 kinds of causes of the violence against women. Historically, they are unequal in terms of the power relation, and therefore that in the political, economic and social processes, they have evolved over many centuries and kept them in the position of power over women. The men are actually in the position of power, and the women therefore are in the subordinate position. The second point is that the control over women's sexuality. This is a very important point. And many societies, as you see, that the violence as a way to control women's sexuality. Likewise, many societies, the violence used to punish women, who exhibit sexual behavior, preferences, attitudes that violate culture norms. So women do not have the freedom and autonomy. The entire, bodies of the woman, sexuality of the woman is controlled by the men. Third point is that the culture ideology. Now, culture in fact defines gender roles. Some customs, tradition, religion, these are something which qualifies or justify violence against women. Or for instance, that if you take an example of the transgender, you take an example of the LGBTQ community, then the patriarchy, which is again been a very doctrine of patriarchy, then patterns of the conflict resolution, and finally that if you go and look at the global figures, you would see that the violence against women again is that which deals with the core question of the peace. So these are some of the important intervention which the United Nations did, but the government plays a very important and significant role in each country to deal with the violence against women. And particularly you would see that in the types of violence, that the domestic violence, how it operates, the cycle of the violence, how it goes on, right? Wife bettering is one of the important issue, and trafficking of the woman, And in order to understand the entire context of the violence against women, the important thing is to understand the patriarchal notion, what patriarchy means. Now, patriarchy is something that which one defines is the rule of the father, and it is of course the word derived from Latin word, right? And Hindi, which we call it Purusha Satta, and it has again a further relationship with the kinship and the family, the ways in which it evolves in the 19th century. And and some of the very interesting scholars like Patricia Wolby and others who define those concepts from means and modes of production and labor, the question of labor. At the same time, some of the European scholars like Catherine McKinnon, who actually deals with the capitalist patriarchy and other things, one has to understand this notion of the patriarchy very, very carefully, right? And it engages further against the woman's capacity to give a birth to the children and the ways in which the power associated with the unique capability, as some of the feminist scholars actually figure out very powerfully. At the same time that patriarchal forms which are there existing at every level, from eldest male to the youngest child, the ways in which it is cultivated through culture of one has to also seriously engage with the human history to understand this, and it leads to the then certain kind of human development, and to engage with its relationship with the structure. It is a very complex in nature, but one has to understand. And its patriarchy has the manifestation of the power which operates to that. One has to also understand that the concept of the power in which that who is situated and located where in the public and private domain, and how those dialogue happen in order to understand the patriarchy and power in the context of the violence against women at every level, from India to South Asia to the developed nation to the global perspective in the context. So I would conclude this lecture by saying that nature of violence against women is there in developed and developing also countries. It causes at multiple level, and the forms and natures are changing. And it has a clear-cut relationship with the relationship of the patriarchy with the power. Then further it goes to the manifestation of violence, and it operates through class, caste, culture, religion, ethnicity, race, and so on. And one has to seriously look into this debate. Thank you.